Thanks for joining us. You're watching Notepad. I'm your host, Ibrahim Sani. Today we speak with Datuk Kumararajah. He is a council member for the National Chamber of Commerce as well as Secretary General of the Malaysian Chamber of Commerce. Datuk, thanks again for spending time with us. Let's talk a little bit about the organisation that you represent. What is it all about?
NCCM, if you know, Ibrahim, is primarily the national chamber. It was formed in 1962. If you see the evolution of chambers in this country, we started off actually oldest chambers being close to 140 years old. Chinese chamber being the first one, then followed by the Indian chambers. The Malay chambers came about a couple of years after that. So all the chambers existed prior to 62. But I think in 62, Cabinet made a decision that we must have a national chamber representing interest of all businessmen, regardless of race. So 62, it was made a cabinet decision and then approved in Parliament. So national chambers by constitution is encompassed of 5 main chambers, which is the Malay Chambers of Commerce, the Chinese Chambers of Commerce, the Indian Chambers of Commerce, the International Chambers of Commerce, which is where the multinational companies are, and the Federation of Malaysian Manufacturers, which came a little bit later. So these 5 constitutional chambers constitutes about what the NCCM is called, which has got about 400,000 members represented or vested, which is about 40% of the total companies that we have in this country, about 1.1, 1.2 million companies.
The idea of having a Chamber of Commerce was important then. Yes. Today we have globalization, internet, we have sharing economy, we have digital economy. How relevant is having a Chamber of Commerce in today's day and age?
In fact, if you ask me, today the need for a Chamber of Commerce is a lot more entrusted, a lot more encasted, simply because if you see the policy direction of the government has now taken an approach. I think across the world, we have seen governments are basically stepping out of the idea of doing business, from state-run enterprises, which is, SEOs in China, to GLCs, as we call it in this country. All these were ways government moved then. Today, most of them are divesting out and letting the private sector, the market forces drive the economy. So in a situation like that, the Chambers of Commerce plays a very huge role because of policy directions, giving near just-in-time feedback to the government to say, look, we're heading in the right direction, or we're heading in the right speed, maybe we need to tweak this, because though we have overarching policies and directions that has been set, but Chambers of Commerce becomes government's dialogue partner. So that's a very important role, because otherwise, you can't blame the government for moving in one direction if they are not given enough feedbacks, little bit of jolt, and says, look, we may want to tweak some of these policies. Simple example I can tell you, if you take definition of SMEs in this country. So if you take the definition of SMEs, use the SME Corp definition, which was changed in 2012, any companies doing less than $100 million is considered an SME. And if you're an SME in this country, you are subjected to certain levels of incentives, certain levels of handicap and access, which you may not have the big players.
Okay.
Though 98.5% of the companies are actually SMEs. But if you go to the Income Tax Act, so if you move from SME Corp in KL Central to LHDN in Jalan Duta, if you see the Income Tax Act 1967 says, if a company has got a paid up capital of less than 2.5 million, it's considered an SME. By definition of the Income Tax Act.
But this contravenes the national definition of SME.
SMEs, this definition is by workforce or by sales, by SME Corp. But if you look at the Income Tax Act, definition is by paid up capital. So a company having less than $2.5 million as paid up capital, but having say $150 million in terms of sales, is still considered an SME. So that guy who's not really SME anymore, but is
he can benefit. Basically, he gained the system.
Not he, but that's what the rule says. So that's the thing, you can't blame the companies, because companies we're not charity organizations, right? So they are for-profit organizations. So why would we want to not take a benefit which is available? But in that way, that synchronization between Income Tax Act and the SME Corp definition of SMEs, this is something of feedback that the market must give. You don't expect somebody sitting in Putrajaya, or somebody who's sitting in SME Corp, or somebody who's sitting in Income Tax, though they know, now they're actually working on. So today, one of the platforms that many of these government agencies created is the idea of having this public-private partnership. And that's why the theme for 2019 National Economic Forum is also the public-private partnership, empowering a nation building. Because that public-private partnership is what has got things moving in the right direction.
Sorry, that's happening tomorrow, am I correct?
That's happening day after tomorrow.
Day after tomorrow.
Day after
okay,
tomorrow,
so
on Thursday, 29th.
We'll dive a little bit more about that event very shortly.
Sure.
Let's stick on the point of synchronization. Right now, you're mentioning that while many factors, many parties are having different definitions, and I'm pretty sure they have reasons behind those definitions, you are also representing 400,000 companies, 400,000 individuals, pardon me. How do you ensure that you're trying to get everybody's interest aligned? Because you're not just representing the 400,000 individuals, you're trying to make sure that every party in this country talks to each other and benefits everyone at best.
Every party as in the business community, right? So the Chambers of Commerce are very clear about rules, regardless of when the previous government regime, this new regime, the new Malaysia landscape, all business chambers so far have obviously been apolitical in the sense we work and we cater to the needs of the business community, may it be from a clan, may it be from a district, may it be from a sectoral based, may it be team based. I think we have been able to forge very good relationships because the government has now really opened up the idea of this continuous engagement must happen, and that has really been the push, both the government side and us. We keep pushing. So we have got enough platforms across the chamber organizations, doesn't matter which part of the country, we have got enough platforms to engage the government agencies. So if you take an example, there's actually multitude, and it can be a full-time job for anybody who's in the chamber organization, especially if you're holding positions, right?
Yeah.
We have got 17 ministries and 70 government agencies doing entrepreneurial work for the development of entrepreneurs in this country. So if you take 2019 as an example, we have got close to 155 individual programs run by 17 ministries, 70 agencies with $13.9 billion funding behind it. So if you need to bring all this into one page, you need to give somebody an executive summary and says, look, this is where things are.
In the lay of the land, basically.
Yeah. So that landscape can be only carved out with the private sector and the public sector working on a single objective.
I kind of knew that there were a lot of ministries doing a lot of entrepreneurial work, because we can't just rely on one ministry stating that obviously they're doing entrepreneurial work, the Ministry of Entrepreneurship, but many other ministries are doing it. And because that you have quantified all this, because of you have identified the stakeholders involved, how then are you going to negotiate this particular work that you do to ensure that you're doing the right thing? What is the measure of success for Chamber of Commerce?
So that's the thing. This one thing is to keep the negotiations going on, right? So negotiations going on. There is nowadays even government. If you see the setting of targets, it is not set by somebody sitting in the corridors of power in Putrajaya and says, look, I pull out a number from the air and says this is the number. We don't do that. If you take a simple example, how GDP contribution of SME started in this country. So if you take 2012, the SME master plan which was launched then, supposed to finish in 2020, it stated then that the SME contribution to this country for GDP was 32%. Today, if you recalibrate the number, it has moved from 32% to 38.3%. So now moving from 38.3%, today the National Entrepreneurship Policy, which Prime Minister launched on the 9th of July this year, has set it at 2030 to be 41%, sorry. So this movement, this dynamic target setting is something that only we can do. And that is why, if you see nowadays, you have got a lot of policies which are not really carved in stone. Nobody says, look, sebab peraturan kita kata macam ni, kita tak boleh buat. So we say, look, but they're always open to things. Pemuda was one initiative I think started at some point in time by the previous Chief Secretary. And many of these engagements are going. MED, the Ministry of Entrepreneurship Development under YB Datuk Sri Rizwan, has actually taken a very proactive role in terms of, though they've got 17 ministries doing all this work, they've been able to bring them all into one single platform or engagement and to say, look, can we see where the synchronization, can we take out all the overlaps, can we re-engineer the process? So this re-engineering is a work in progress.
Tuan Mahathir did say that government is bad at business, government shouldn't be doing business. What government should do is to facilitate business and tax the hell out of businesses. That's the mantra that he's been saying. He's not been saying very recently, he's been saying this for decades. And yet we see the government, sometimes the same government that he led when he was the 4th Prime Minister, be so involved in businesses. How do you reconcile
that's the thing,
with
right?
this?
So like what you said, the new policy, I suppose, in New Malaysia is the government has no business to be in business.
Yeah.
Right? That is why you find at least he has taken some measures. It was there even in the previous regime, some idea of wanting to divest out of some of these companies. Now the problem is this, one side we are divesting out and one side we are still having our fingers, our footprints, our push and pull, the golden share in many of the strategic initiatives. Now, the argument for it is, if the government doesn't have a strategic role, if the government doesn't have this big brother feel in those strategic industries, maybe those strategic industries don't have the advantage that they need. But is it that role the government should play, or should the government play some sort of I level the playing field for you, I make the policy direction, but I let the implementation run by the private sector. If we see the growth figures that are coming out from MIER or Bank Negara recently, for the second quarter we have grown 4.9%, but the private sector has grown 6.1%. So the reason why this private sector driven economy works is simply because the private sector will be able to grow. There is an agility that is inbuilt. You can't blame the government for not moving at that speed, because that is not what the government should be doing. But the private sector can move, the agility to move, the hiring and firing power, right? So that's what Astro AWANI has. But if you're working for RTM, I'm sure you can't sack anybody. You know, it'll take 2 lifetimes before you even reprimand them.
Go on. I will add that. Don't worry, Dato'. Don't worry. Yeah.
So if you use that approach, right? So 6.1 against 4.9 in a situation where, if you see our neighboring countries, right? So Singapore, the last growth in the last quarter is 0.1%. It is the lowest in the history of Singapore to grow at 0.1%.
Yeah.
And China, the new growth is 6.9%, which is the lowest in the last 10 years. So that has now become the new norm, right? So we are doing pretty well if you take our neighbors into concurrence, if you take the regional economy that is moving, we are doing pretty well. What we need is clear policy directions. And that is why the theme for 2019 National Economic Forum is also theme-based and not sectoral-based. When we did it, the first inaugural event in 2017, it was more sector-based. Right?
Now it's theme-based.
Now it's theme-based, because we decided that it's theme-based is probably right if you're taking a 30,000 feet view as far as policies go. If you really want to deep dive, so if you're reaching 10,000 feet, then you may want to be a lot more sector-based. And by the time you hit the strategies, you're already about 6 feet.
Okay, we'll take a short break. When we come back, we'll discuss a little bit more about the forum moving forward. This is my conversation with Datuk Dr Kumararajah. Don't go anywhere. Thanks for staying on with us. I'm with Datuk Dr Kumararajah. He is of the Malaysian Chamber of Commerce, Secretary General there, as well as a council member for the National Chamber of Commerce. Datuk, this is a very fascinating conversation that we're having. I want to ask you a little bit more about the forum that is happening midweek. What is the forum about? And can you elucidate more about the objectives or the end product that the people can actually gain from attending the forum?
So like I said, it's a theme-based thing. Empowering public-private partnership, building empowering nation building is our theme for 2019. We are targeting close to about 800,000 entrepreneurs who will be able to share their thoughts, and also be there when the government officials and the ministers share actually their thoughts. We have carved it out in such a way that we've got the Minister of Entrepreneurship, Minister of Economic Affairs having an opening event, and so they set the policy landscape, and we anchor it at the end with the Finance Minister, Yang Berhormat Lim Guan Eng, who actually will close the event with Making Malaysia Great Again. In between, we have made it into 4 different themes. One is setting the government policy, one is setting the vibrant SME landscape, one is talking about the digital workforce or the workforce of the future, and one is talking about regional integration. So the reason why we took some of these topics are these are all mid-term to long-term applications, mid-term to long-term targets, if you want to say.
So nothing short-term?
Nothing short-term, except for the input that will probably go in from the first event, or the first event of the day, which is towards the budget 2020, which is the last budget for the 11th Malaysia Plan. Our mid-term target is only 2 guiding policies. One is the 12th Malaysia Plan. So the 12th Malaysia Plan running from 2021 to 2025, that's our mid-term target. Our long-term target is the National Entrepreneurship Policy, which is the Dasar Keuangan Negara 2030. That would be the long-term target. So if you see the DKN 2030, that has got 6 strategic trusts, 19 strategies and 62 different initiatives to make Malaysia entrepreneurial nation. That is a work in progress. The government has actually set it out, the PM has launched it, the minister has all gung-ho about getting it done, but you need the private sector to step up. If you want to know that 62 initiatives, they are still working, they are still not really cast in stone, though they have put it out, but they're still working on see whether it should be 62 or whether we can actually amalgamate a few. So this is something that we will go on doing over the next couple of years, including at this forum. If you see topics like regional integration, the reason why we've taken this is if you take the domestic economy, though there's a lot of drive towards DDI now as opposed to FDI, which is where we were 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Tun's first round was more FDI driven. Now it is more DDI driven. But with 32, 33 million population, there's not much you can do with the domestic economy. But let's take a little bit higher approach and says, look, can we look at ASEAN region? So if you take the 641 million population of ASEAN alone, we are third largest in the world after China and India, pure population size. But if you just step out a little bit and says ASEAN plus our 10 friends across the country, say for Japan, Hong Kong, Korea, Australia, New Zealand, you got about 3 billion population. So you're talking about huge,
India as well,
huge market. If you take, we've got six bilateral FTAs, we've got 7 bilateral FTAs in ASEAN region. So we've got 13 bilateral FTAs, and we are very much nearing, I think YB Darul Aiking, who's actually chair in that session, is said that the next meeting is actually in Beijing, and they're trying to get a lot of this chapters concluded by end of this year. So the RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, actually puts us out in a very big market. That will be the largest mega FTA, covering close to 39% of the world GDP, 3.4 billion people with $49.8 trillion market economy. That will give us a huge access which we didn't have before.
Dato', people are saying that the opportunities are there, and people have been saying that these are the opportunities that lay for the taking, right? But in realizing these opportunities, it's not that easy. ASEAN is not ubiquitous in a language. While we have 600 million people, 670 million people, we speak a dozen languages, and we are at different levels of growth. There's nothing good or bad about it. We're just saying that Singapore, for instance, is way ahead, yes, Myanmar is somewhere else, we are somewhere in the middle, middling economies everywhere. We're not as, say,
united as EU is.
EU or China, yes, or homogenous like the US or even India. People do see this and sense this is a problem, unless it's something like Asia where everybody needs it, sure, and you don't really need the language to get it done. It's very hard for you to roll out a program or a business where it benefits ASEAN. This could become a crippling problem for us to realize, yes, that opportunity.
I think that has been identified, and that is why we are having a lot of this ASEAN harmonization going on. So we've got harmonization across taxes, we've got harmonization in terms of logistics, supply chain, in terms of import-exports, and in terms of giving incentives. So I think the government, the ASEAN Secretariat, is actually very much geared towards getting at least the economic part on. Now you probably find all this integration, everything happening in terms of the cultural and other things like travel, for example. But economic integration, economic harmonization across the ASEAN region is set to happen either by design or by default. Now the question is, if it's going to be by default, it's going to take an awful long time, and by the time everybody else would have actually surpassed us, and it will be like a nasi sudah jadi bubur. But if you look at it in terms of by design, I think we should be there. And I think with MITI, with YB Darul Aiking, and I think he's quite gung-ho about getting it done, and that's the reason why he's actually pushing for closure of some of these FTAs. Because FTAs gives us a kind of leapfrog, gives us a momentum that we wouldn't have otherwise.
Now, I have to ask you the elephant in the room. We're on a cloud of a possible cabinet reshuffle. Is this, I guess, cloud overshadowing the objectives that you're trying to achieve here?
Not really, because again, the National Economic Forum and the chamber organizations, I'm sure everybody would agree, that we are not individual based, but we are more institutional based. So regardless of whether who the individual who's sitting in the cabinet for that matter, or who's driving that particular agenda, I think the institution still works. So the cabinet institution, the government, that estate, the government estate will definitely work
regardless of who holds support.
So we are quite confident, and we are very supportive of what's happening. So regardless of that learning curve issue, whether it is very steep, very tight, or whether there is a starting problem, or whether you hit the ground running, I suppose that happens in any organization. And I'm sure if you've taken over a country after 62 years, I'm sure it's bound to happen. That shuffling must happen.
We'll take a short break. I'm with Datuk Dr Kumararajah of the Chamber of Commerce. We'll come back and discuss more with him. Don't go anywhere. Thanks for staying on with us. I'm with Datuk Dr Kumararajah of the Malaysia Chamber of Commerce. Datuk, the business community is entwined with the conversations of the regular Malaysians. Numerous polls have shown that Malaysians are still putting economic issues as top of the problem. We're not that interested, we meaning the rakyat, is not that interested in, say, corruption cases, in the ongoing 1MDB trial. While those are important, more important stuff includes minimum wage, includes mobility, includes KLIA functioning as they would normally.
Or should.
How do you reconcile with these two ideas? You have national issues that are very much important, resulting in the change of government, and today's government that have to deal with past problems as well as manage the pressing concerns of the rakyat, which is food on table. How do you see this government navigating this innuendo or this dilemma?
I think 18 months has really given them a good start, because in the early days, I suppose they were a bit clueless in terms of where we're heading or where we're not. I think we were too stuck in trying to correct what was wrong before, or the perceived wrong that was done at some point in time. But now I think everybody has realized, look, while we take concern of what has happened before, governance issues must be put in place, institutional integrity must be there, but while we do that, we must be forward looking. So I suppose today somebody has taken that Pareto principle of 80-20 and says, look, let's do 80% moving forward, 20% we start cleaning up and seeing what we have gone wrong before and putting all those processes and procedures in place. So this 80% focus, I think today the government has realized, and we keep bringing back that narrative, at least as far as economy is concerned, and that's the reason why NEF 2019 also is time to kind of adjust right, because before YB announces the budget in October 11th this year, there is still 8 weeks left towards the budget, and I think this is about the right timing why we want to still keep bringing back the narrative, because top of mind is the economic issues, and that's the reason why I was telling you about we're looking out for 800 participants towards that event. We actually closed the last count last evening we already about 700 plus. So we are there, and it will be good because today we see this hunger to bring the economic narrative forward is more pressing. It's a lot more pressing, a lot more needed, and it's a lot more race neutral.
Okay.
That's a
I was about to ask you something else, then you brought this up.
Okay. That's another elephant in the room you should have addressed.
Yes, because you have a Malaysian Chamber of Commerce, then you have the Malaysian Chamber of Commerce, Chinese Chamber of Commerce, Indian Chamber of Commerce.
Agree. International.
When will we grow out of this?
Correct. So agreed. So this is an evolutionary issue, right? So like I said, the Chinese Chamber started 140 years ago. The Indian Chamber is now the oldest, is in Penang, 100 years ago. Malay Chamber is 60 years old plus. So now we've got the National Chamber. At some point in time, the evolution all overseas, though while today we are still fighting it on a race or a need base, but eventually we will come to a need based as such. So this race based to need based will happen. It is a matter of when. Are we in a super fast highway towards that? I don't think so. Have we got a lot of issues, navigational issues? Yes, we have. But I think government also has realized, yes, the Bumiputera narrative, it's not a zero-sum game. I think that one we are also very clear. Being a non-Bumi, I would actually vouch for the fact that there must be some sort of a level playing field. Now, that's really not happening simply because by this affirmative policies that you think that the government is putting in place, and sometimes the private sector is not really happy. If you look at digitalization, what's happening in the world today, many countries that had the edge at one point in time are actually losing out. Western countries, especially in particular. Today, Asia is a superpower. in terms of economic growth, right? So nowhere America or EU or Europe can come close to that.
But social problems persist.
Yes, but that's evolutionary. So in a way, if you look at digitalization, it's kind of a level the playing field across the boards. So if you look at now what is being sold online today, it is very race neutral. Nobody realizes whether this fella is sitting in which part of the world. Who cares? End of the day, as long as that product at a perceived quality is supplied at just in time, I think we all well, and the market economies will actually dictate that something like this happens. So government has taken an approach like, yes, we must help the Bumiputra community or the community in need or the B40 as we call it in the last 5-7 years. We call it this B40 community. Now this B40 community must be assisted. But whether it's going to be a push or a pull approach. So do we give enough to the top 20 to have a pull effect, or are we going to push it from the bottom? I think it is best bang for the buck to have market forces drive T20 with government setting policies, whereas at the bottom 40 level, it is better for government to push with market forces subsidizing.
So you're talking about hybrid socialism.
It must happen, because you cannot take a capitalist approach, or you take a socialist approach, because you cannot leave out the bottom 40 community, because we are a young nation, 62, 65.
Is that the reason why we can't get it right just yet? Because there's no model like this happening elsewhere?
Elsewhere, or something we don't have precedence, and say, especially in a multiracial market like that.
We have the Brits to thank for that, but
so we don't have it before. So I think we have done pretty well. If you see, we are an example to many parts of the world in terms of can we get.
Sorry, I don't want to out your vintage, but when you were growing up, Malaysia isn't as rambunctious as right now. Am I correct? Intra-racist, intra-religion, as opposed to today.
Okay, again, right? So I don't know whether this is happening at the political level alone, or is it really happening at the social fabric itself. To me, I think it is happening mostly at the political level. Whereas if you really see on the ground, is there social unrest? Is there issues between races, especially the main races? And if you take Peninsula, for example, you don't have to go very far. You look at Sabah Sarawak. In fact, they have actually gone past us. They are fine.
Yes, they're fine.
They are fine.
They're fine.
We are not. We are still grappling with the idea like, you pass the mosque, you got an issue. Somebody sees the cross on the church, you've got an issue. Somebody's ringing of the temple bells becomes a big issue, and somebody's what they call the azan is being prayed a bit loud, and somebody makes a big issue about it. I don't think we have gone past those nitty-gritty details, but I think across the country there is some semblance of, look, is this what we want, or do we want national? Are we Malaysian Indian, or are we Malaysian first? I think that's a big question. I mean, that's a more political question, really nothing to do with the NEF, but that's a question that we must answer at some point in time.
Yeah. But you did allude to it. While it is a political question, it can be resolved by food on the table. It can be resolved by
economy is relatively race neutral. Yes, one of the earlier integration that we can have, so this natural assimilation of the races can happen at the market forces. It can happen at the economic level before it happens at the social level.
Right. I have to draw this conversation to a close. Just another reminder, when and where is the forum
The
again?
National Economic Forum 2019 is happening at KL Convex, organized by the National Chamber of Commerce and Industries. So if you really haven't been able to look at our Facebook or our website, or actually turned up at our office, I'm sure you can walk in and register. Registration starts as early as 7 o'clock. We're expecting the opening at about 8:30 in the morning.
Thank you very much. That was my conversation with Datuk Dr Kumararajah of the Chamber of Commerce of Malaysia. If you've missed any part of this interview, just head on to astro.com. Look for Notepad there. And you can also watch this interview on your mobile app. Just download our AWANI app wherever you get the application. Thanks very much for watching, and goodbye. Thank you, Datuk.
Thank you, brother.